via the County Commission's website as soon as possible, and is available on request in the interim. Members of the public are also welcome to observe the public session of the meeting today. Those who are watching this morning, thank you for taking the time to join us. You are here to observe, not to participate, therefore your camera and microphone are already on. I'd particularly like to welcome the representative from Corian and Elanshire. Apologies for the pronunciation. I am not a Gaelic speaker, and as of today, I will continue to use Western Isles, but I welcome you all to watching us this morning. For anyone participating in the meeting who's joining us online, please keep your cameras off and your microphone on mute, except when it's your item to speak. May I also ask those who are speaking during the meeting to speak clearly and loudly for the benefit of the recording, but also the benefit of those with more reduced hearing. That takes us to item 1, formal item 1. And Sarah, apologies for absence.
Yeah, we have apologies from Andy Cowie.
Second item is the declarations of connections. I know there are a couple around the table today, so can please people put it on the record. Jennifer.
Item 13, the future public audit model. As a chief executive of another audited public body, but I've taken advice and I'm advised there's not a conflict of interest.
And Malcolm and Carol, you're in the same boat. Yeah, thank you. You're recorded. And Ruth?
And we are I'm a board member rather than chief exec.
Thank you. Ruth?
Yes, for item 5, I have a family connection to the chief executive of Colonial Share. I've mentioned that to the director, who's also checked with the ethics partner, and it's not sufficiently close relationship to preclude me from taking part in the discussions.
Any other connections?
I'm also a member of an audited body.
Okay. Duly noted, and I don't think any of those would take advice or refusal this morning. Thank you. Item 3 is the order of business. As normal, I'm seeking the Commission's approval for the order of business today. I propose that we consider items 9 to 16 in private for the reasons set out on the agenda. Are members in agreement?
Thanks.
Takes us to item 4, minutes and matters arising from the previous meeting. Sarah.
Thanks, Chair. There were 2 actions arising from the last meeting, both of which are covered on the agenda today. So in the policy manager's update, an update has been provided on Pride in Place funding and the methodology for the distribution of funding. And in the Controller of Audit's update today, she will provide an update on audit delivery, and including in relation to Click Manager Council, which members expressed ongoing concern about at the last meeting.
Any questions or clarifications required on the minutes? I see approval. So content to approve. Item 5. This is the main item this morning from our session today, which is our section 102 report on the Western Isles Council. This is a statutory section 102 report on the control of audit, and the report was produced following the 23-24 audit of the council. The Commission is invited to consider and endorse the Controller's report in this session, noting that our conclusions are not necessarily the Commission's conclusions. The Controller and the audit team are here to provide any clarifications or answers to questions that members may have on the Controller's report. We have about 50 minutes for this session. We will then consider in private later today how we wish to proceed. I'm handing over to Helena. Welcome.
Thank you, and good morning, everybody. And I welcome the opportunity to discuss my report on the cyber attack at Corlan and Elanshire, and I'll apologise also for my pronunciation. And I thank the audit team, in particular Claire and Adam, who sat alongside me this morning, for all of their hard work in completing the 23-24 annual audit. In November 2023, the caller experienced a sophisticated cyber attack. The impact of this attack was immediate and severe. Major systems were inaccessible, and the attack resulted in the near total loss of data files held on important servers. The impact on services varied, but the most severely affected were those reliant on the council servers, with finance being the most severely impacted. Auditors concluded that the council escalated the issue appropriately. The recovery was complex and the Call used interim works arounds to ensure continuity of service. In April 2025, it was confirmed that all IT systems affected by the cyber attack were now operational, although work continues to integrate data and work through backlogs of tasks. The financial impact of this incident has been estimated at £0.95 million, but this does not include the significant time burden placed on staff in relation to recovery efforts, which should not be underestimated. The auditor reported that prior to the cyber attack, the caller had appropriate and effective systems of financial control and reporting. However, the attack meant that the caller could not access any of its financial systems and lost a significant amount of its data. Temporary financial control arrangements were put in place, but the loss of the financial ledger meant that revenue and capital budgeting were not possible, and a complete financial picture for 23-24 was not available until after the year end. Monitoring reports throughout 2024-25 have also been delayed. While the finance team have recreated accounting records, the attack has resulted in a loss of supporting documentation, and as such, there is not the level of audit evidence required, resulting in a disclaimer of audit opinion. The ledger became operational in October 2024, and the council has focused efforts on inputting the necessary data to reconstruct the council's financial position and rebuilding robust financial controls and ensuring data completeness and accuracy. And auditors will review these arrangements as part of the 24-25 annual audit. The question I know the Commission will be interested in was, could this attack have been prevented? And while auditors, as well as independent reviews, have identified that the organisation had gaps in their cybersecurity, business continuity and disaster recovery arrangements, it is not possible to conclude whether a more robust control environment would have prevented the attack. However, addressing these gaps may have helped to reduce its impact or improve the speed of detection and response. It's not possible to be more definitive, but I'll conclude by highlighting that my report notes a number of lessons that I think others would be worth highlighting to. More generally, in relation to IT infrastructure, preparedness and testing, staff training, and IT team capacity. Thank you.
Thanks, Hannah. Very helpful. Normal, we structure the call, the questioning that we follow up on in this to make sure that the people can understand why we've got concerns or where we have concerns and how we're managing to pick out the right information. So to structure the discussion, we're going to work our way through a small number of subject areas covering the Council's preparedness in response to the cyber attack, the improvement actions taken since then, and some broader lessons to learn, not just for the Council, but also for the sector as a whole. We'll start therefore with questions around governance and risk management, and ask Jennifer to lead off the question.
Thank you, Jo. Thank you, Helena and team, for the report. I think it's very clear from reading the report, a lot of hard work has gone in to recover from the attack. But I'd really like to go back to the sort of what we know about what was in place before this happened. You said in your opening remarks, Helena, it's not possible to conclude whether this could be avoided. But I suppose I'm interested in exploring a little bit about what governance was in place for the council to understand how vulnerable they might have been. So I've got a few areas to explore. I'll run through them all, and then you can obviously kind of think about how you want to respond. So I'm firstly interested in whether we know whether ownership and responsibilities for cybersecurity were clear. And I'm not talking about at the level of IT professionals. I'm talking about in terms of the leadership in the council, were people clear that they were responsible? And then I'm interested whether we know that the people in those positions had had adequate training to discharge those responsibilities. I'm interested in whether the council had set a risk appetite for its cyber risk, because it's very easy to think all you need to do is keep spending money on this problem, but it could be an infinite amount of money, and you have to have a risk appetite in order to inform decisions. And if they did have a risk appetite, have we got evidence that that was applied around their IT infrastructure and cybersecurity? And then in the context of all of that, I'm interested in the monitoring and reporting. How were senior people in the council aware of the level of risk they were carrying? Were they aware that there were gaps in the kind of IT resourcing and things like that? So it's all of that really around, I mean, under the heading of sort of governance around the cyber risks. And then I've got a couple of questions about what's happening to rectify the gaps if we do understand that there are gaps. Is that clear. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. And there's, as you said, a lot in there, and I'll kick off and then I'll bring in the team to add some of the detail. I think a couple of things that I'd highlight. So auditors have reported in 2022, 2023 that there was no clear responsibility at committee level for oversight of IT risks. However, those charged with governance were cited on the high level cybersecurity risks via the operational risk register, which is presented to the Policy and Resources Committee. I don't think we're aware of any members receiving specific training on cybersecurity prior to the cyber attack. But again, if it's not aware, might not mean that it's not happened. In terms of the specifics around the risk appetite, again, I'm not aware that was something that was explicitly discussed or applied to decisions around IT infrastructure and cybersecurity. But I would observe that auditors have highlighted for a number of years risks associated with incomplete business continuity plans. So as far back as 2016-17, the annual audit highlighted that the IT unit business continuity plan was still to be completed, and that the systems and supporting protocols required as part of the disaster recovery plan had not been addressed. At the time, the action was agreed by the council with an implementation date of March 2018, but subsequent audits then highlighted that that was incomplete and still ongoing. So on that basis, I'd infer that it possibly wasn't seen as a priority when compared with the council priorities. But I'll bring in the team to talk a little bit more perhaps about the different risk registers that the council has and how they were scrutinised.
Yeah, so the as Helen has pointed out, the operational risk register is where they monitored the cybersecurity risk at the formal governance level, so through the Policy and Resources Committee. However, it should be noted that this was at a strategic level and didn't get down into the detail. A more detailed risk register was maintained by the asset and infrastructure sector, and this covered the detail of IT and cybersecurity risks and included several labelled as high or extreme risks. However, we flagged in our report that the risk register lacked key information such as responsible officers and timescales for address and the proposed solutions. This detailed risk register was not considered by any designated governance committee, and we concluded that there was no clear committee responsibility for IT risks. Moving on to a bit about what's happened since then. Since the cyber attack, the actions to address the cybersecurity recommendations are now monitored by the Audit and Scrutiny Committee, and this has started to be reported at every meeting. However, it's now moved to alternate meetings as some of the actions have been addressed and they feel that the risk has significantly lowered.
It's really helpful, and you've come straight into the kind of what's happening, because I picked up from your report, Helena, that there was some suggestion that not all the recommendations had been fully implemented and there were some gaps which gave me cause for concern, I suppose, because from what I'm hearing, it sounds like there wasn't as much governance around the cybersecurity risk as there could have been prior to the attack, but I would certainly be hoping that that is being made rock solid the other side. So I think it would be something we'd want to continue to look at, the follow-up to the recommendations. So no, thank you, Jo. I think that covers the things I wanted to ask about in relation to governance.
Okay, any follow-ups from Mike or Derek?
Yeah, if I could, Chair, thank you. Thanks very much for the report. My particular question, this really relates to paragraph 24 of the report. It says to return to an unqualified opinion that will require evidence of sustained progress on financial governance and also system resilience. I wonder if I could tease that out a bit more to what that would entail. So at a very simplistic level, issued the opinion in the 23-24 accounts on the basis of a lack of evidence. Now that must impact on the closing value for the opening balances for 24-25. So I'm wondering how you move away from that whilst the council is reinstating its systems going forward. How do you overcome the initial balances that will form part of those the following year's year's accounts. And so I wonder, could you answer that specific point, and then also what financial governance and systems resilience will need to look like or get to before you can get back to an unqualified opinion?
And I'll bring in the team to answer that very specific point. I suppose a couple of things that I wanted to highlight as well. So as I've already mentioned, the loss of that detailed accounting record has meant that auditors were unable to obtain that sufficient audit evidence. I do think it is important to highlight that in the annual audit report, auditors commend management on their ability to prepare a draft set of financial statements and highlight that the issues which impacted their audit opinion are reflective of the underlying loss of financial information, rather than the response by management in preparing the financial statements or providing the evidence. And I do think it's just important to put that on the record, but bring in Claire to talk a little bit more about the specifics of the opinion.
Yeah, so the finance system was implemented in October 2024, and as Helena outlined, the finance team have done a lot of work to reinstate those financial controls and rebuild the ledger. However, there is the indication that the first 7 months of 24-25 were still being maintained and recorded using spreadsheets. Although that information has now been put onto the ledger, there are issues with the manual controls processes, which mean the financial governance around the first 7 months of the year were significantly weaker. When we're thinking about our opinion, we're really thinking about how we can get assurance over the in-year transactions and the closing balance. We recognise there will be issues with the opening balances, and we're preparing for a modified opinion in 24-25 as well. So we will really be seeking to get more assurance on the closing balances in year, which will then give us enough assurance to support our 25-26 position. I think it's important to note that there were gaps in the data coming into 24-25, and the finance team have done additional work to close those gaps. So even though we won't get full assurance over the opening balances, we're assured and cautiously optimistic that we'll be in a better position than we were when we signed the accounts anyway.
Okay, that's helpful clarification. Thanks.
Can I just follow up on that, Claire? Does that mean it's permanently got a modified opinion, given 24-25 leads into 25-26, or just 25-26 lead into modified opinion for
No.
next year?
So as I said, we'll be focusing on the closing balances of 25-26. And if we can get enough assurance over that, then that means the 25-26 accounts don't have the same issues with opening balances. But from looking at the situation down south, there's an estimation that at least post disclaimer opinion, it will be a minimum of 2 years to get back to a sort of unqualified opinion. And that's what we're looking at. We're hopeful, but not promised, that we'll be looking at it for the 26-27 accounts. We'll consider as much as we can.
Mike, did you have anything you want?
Really just on the, I mean, first to say, recognising like others, the enormous efforts that the council and its staff have gone into, and that will be discussed later. Just in terms of the relationship between the IT function and, as it were, the governance, looking at, as of now, does it appear that there was a disjunct really from what the internal audit report was suggesting, in that cybersecurity was adequate given the resources, but there was no process for actually getting the risk appetite in place. So I suppose the question comes down to, is it now clear that there is a risk appetite in place, and that there is proper ownership of somebody in the senior team as well as the IT manager for the remaining risks?
So I think in terms of the specifics, as Claire's already outlined in terms of the response, so the Audit and Scrutiny Committee is now leading on the follow-up and the implementation of the audit report and the recommendations, and they started meeting monthly, and I think have moved, I think you said, to every other months.
Yeah,
Alternately. So in terms of the risk appetite, I'm not sure if we've got the information on that. I think the other thing just to highlight is that in September, the Audit and Scrutiny Committee considered a further independent review on cyber resilience that was undertaken by a Glasgow internal audit, and that report highlighted that progress had been made as well. So I think hopefully that it concluded that a reasonable level of assurance can be placed upon the control environment and that the key controls are in place and operating effectively. It made one high priority recommendation and then medium priority recommendations which management have accepted and are progressing. So hopefully that gives that assurance now in terms of their consideration of the control environment which they are operating. Claire, I don't know if you've anything.
Specifically on the point of risk, we had raised that recommendation around improving the risk management processes in our 22-23 report, and when we followed that up this year, it was only partially implemented. So each risk now has a recommended responsible officer, but there are still not timelines and the risks remain high level. So I think there is still some work for Corla to do improving the risk process.
Moving on then to preparedness, which is great. Calls from there, Malcolm, please pick up.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and others have said thank you for the report. Helena, you touched on this in your opening remarks, but I was wondering if you might be able to expand a bit, and it's the part of the report that states that control weaknesses, even if the control weaknesses had been addressed, it might not have prevented the attack. I think that's quite sobering, and I just wonder how we encourage councils to apply resources from, in effect, we're saying even if you have very strong control measures, you know, that this might not prevent the attack. So is it about mitigating the effects of an attack? Is it more about that? And the other thing I was slightly surprised about, and as a non-IT person, was that the independent investigation couldn't find any indicators of compromise. I just wondered, is that unusual, or is that just something that we wouldn't expect to find normal?
Thank you. Yeah, and again, I'll offer a few remarks and then bring the team in a little bit more detail. I suppose just that conclusion around control weaknesses, as I said in my opening remarks, it's just difficult to be definitive on that. Both the auditor and the independent review had identified the organisation had gaps in their cyber security, but as you've also highlighted, crucially, their business continuity and their disaster recovery arrangements as well. And while internal audit concluded that there were clear weaknesses, the system in place was considered adequate at the time. I think it's also important to note that organisations with more robust cyber security arrangements have also been victims of cyber attacks. So it's just not possible to be definitive. But I think, as you've highlighted, there are absolutely lessons to be learned around recovery as well. And my report highlights that disaster recovery exercises were completed on an ad hoc basis, and the cyber incident response plan and the disaster recovery plan had not been finalised and approved by members. And we know that the caller had a corporate business continuity plan that was approved prior to the attack, but the application of that was inconsistent, and it was not sort of considered at the scale of the attack. So again, I think there are definitely lessons to learn there. In terms of that specific question around indicators of compromise, my understanding is that it's not uncommon for no indicators of compromise to be detected.
Yeah, no, thanks, Joe. Thanks, Helen and colleagues, for the report. I wonder if I could just follow up on Malcolm's question about the general sort of readiness. I mean, I hear loud and clear what you've said, Helen, and you've repeated it to Malcolm, that the weaknesses that are identified, I think it's in paragraphs 55 to 58, and you can't be certain that even if they'd been addressed, that the attack wouldn't have happened. And I see, reading through the report, that those weaknesses identified in those paragraphs feed directly into the conclusions, which is what you'd expect. But I wonder if I could just probe a little bit further on sort of staff capacity. I mean, the figure that jumped out at me when I read this, and I absolutely get this is probably particular to the Western Isles and its locality and rurality, the 30% vacancy in IT officers, including some of the senior systems analysts. I mean, you can't see even on that statistic that had a direct impact on potential disruption that was caused by the attack. And I just wonder if you could give us any further update in addition to responding to that point, because it does seem specific, very high to me, although I know the global number is low compared to, say, Edinburgh or Glasgow. But how is that position now, today? And has it improved? And is there an indication that it's going to continue like that? And I've got a follow-up from the back of that. Thanks.
So on the specifics, again, I'm not sure we can be definitive as to whether, having filled those vacancies, it would have been in a better position. But what we do know is that there were 30% of positions were vacant, which did have I suppose, an impact on the disaster recovery and cyber resilience plans and activities. 4 of those 5 vacant posts have now been filled, and applicants are in post, and the 1 remaining post is being progressed.
And that's thanks, Stuart. Thanks, Helen. That's as of today. So there's just 1 vacancy in effect.
I believe that's the case.
That was certainly the position when we signed the accounts
Right.
which was in September.
And I guess just the other general point that flags up to me, and it's really just by way of comment, I don't know if you want to respond to it or not, is, I mean, obviously it's all internal, the IT provision that's happening here in Western Isles and continues to be so, as far as I can gather. I mean, that's increasingly not the common picture now across all 32 authorities, particularly the larger local authorities in Scotland. And I just wondered if there'd been any discussion or debate in the Western Isles about outsourcing this provision. I mean, it's really just by way of a query. I just was inquisitive to know if that had happened or not.
Yeah, I'm not sure on the specifics of that.
Not that I'm aware of.
Right. Okay, thanks very much.
Did you get any?
No, I'm just concerned that the message that we're saying that even organisations that have really strong, and I don't doubt it's true, but really strong measures in place being victims of such attacks. I just wonder how we can encourage the message we can hear today, how we're encouraging councils to invest in, if in actual fact people get an attack anyway. I guess it's more about the mitigating afterwards.
So I think the message would be ensure your systems are as robust as they can be at that particular time, in line with guidance. Yeah. I'm not an IT expert, but it would be, ensure that you are following the IT guidance and doing what you can to mitigate the likelihood of an attack. But also invest in that preparedness, knowing that cybersecurity is an ever-changing, ever-increasing risk that many organisations are facing. So it's also about investing in that preparedness for recovery and resilience as well.
Just one really specific point. The backup system was not air gapped. I isolated the main system. Is it accurate to think that made the process of recovery more difficult because basically had no data left? And it is a reason why I think in the report says that the air gapping is not yet in place.
Yeah, I'll bring in Claire to talk specifically around the arrangements for the backups and that.
Yeah, so I think undoubtedly the fact that it wasn't air gapped did lead to the backups being targeted by the cyber attack as well. The reason for it not currently being air gapped is they're looking for additional funding to support the costs of air gapping the backups. The decision for that was to be made in September this year. So basically budget allocation moved to support the air gap. I'm not aware of what happened at those discussions. That was the reason for the slight delay. It was just to move funding.
Can I pick up on that, Claire? You're telling me that council does not believe that proper cyber security measures are not a priority for the budget allocation?
No, I don't think it's that they don't believe that they're not a priority. It's more that they just needed to have that discussion formally.
But they've had to spend money to back up, to recreate, so they're currently spending money they didn't budget for and didn't need to budget for had they done it properly. So the notion that they can do these things ahead of a sign-off or something as serious as this, they're not thinking that's essential now, given what they've experienced.
As I say, I'm not aware of the outcome of that discussion, but I know it was up for discussion in September, and that was the last piece of the puzzle to confirm all those.
Just wanted to ask a bit more about business continuity planning, and good that there was kind of business continuity plans in place, but they were used quite inconsistently across the departments. And I was struck by the comment about the fact that it looked like they were kind of almost set aside in some cases because business continuity plans, they said, didn't kind of match the scale of the incident that they were kind of presented with. And that seemed to be quite a strange thing, because surely the whole point of business continuity plans is to cover things like catastrophic events such as these. So I just wonder if there's been some progress made around ensuring that these business continuity plans will work effectively in the future and will be applied appropriately across the departments. Again, I just thought it was strange that they seem to not have been used in the way that you might think was intended.
Absolutely. And again, I'll bring Claire into sort of the latest position on the business continuity plan. I think, as I said, it was approved, but it was inconsistently applied because it exceeded the anticipated scenario. But they did use it as a useful framework, I think, was the basis. I think the other thing as well, obviously, is around the testing of business continuity plans and ensuring that they are tested so that you can test the scenarios and then see, in fact, how you would use them and whether they are useful. But Claire, do you want to come in and say the latest position on the plan?
Yeah, so the business continuity plan was originally approved in June 2023 and was then updated in 2024 following the cyber attack. From review of the plan, some of the issues that were raised as part of the lessons learned haven't been addressed. However, the revised business continuity plan was done before the lessons learned activity. So I would suggest that they do need to go back and look at all the lessons learned.
Takes us on, I think, to the next session, which is on the impact this has had on services and staff and the financial impacts. Can I ask Ruth, if you want to lead off on that too?
Thank you. Again, just worth saying, obviously, I recognise, as I'm sure the Commission will review, the huge impact this would have had on staff, and it's very clear that there was a very quick response, but it's also been a very sustained period of time that staff had to respond. I just wondered if you could say a bit more about the impact of both the initial attack and then the recovery stage on staff workload and morale. We know that there were gaps in some of the teams like IT. I don't know what the resilience levels were in finance and the comms department, who in particular I think have been very hit by the immediate actions that needed to be taken. So just wondering how the council is responding to looking at the kind of longer term impact for staff dealing with the day-to-day job, but also all the extra work that's come from this incident.
And a couple of things that I'll say by opening remarks. So obviously flagged on a number of occasions throughout the report, the impact on staff, as you've already mentioned, the increase in work volume as a result of having to use manual processes and the pressure, I think, that comes with this as well. I think I would highlight that, as I set out in the exhibit in my report, not all services were equally affected. So I think it is worth bearing that in mind when we're thinking about the impacts on staff. There hasn't been a formal assessment on the impact of the cyber attack on staff wellbeing, but they did conduct an employee survey in November. The return rate for that was about 35%, which, as we know, seems low, but is comparable to wider employee surveys. And the results of that were presented in April this year to the Policy and Resources Committee, and demonstrated a fairly stable picture, I think, in terms of satisfaction. But I'll bring in the audit team to talk a little bit more, I suppose, about some of their interactions with staff. I think the final thing I draw attention to is the data on sickness absence, actually, and looking at the local government benchmark framework. If you look at the sickness absence days per employee for the non-teacher statistics, it shows that in 24-25 the council is below the Scottish average, and although it did rise in 23-24 compared to the prior year, it has since come down. So obviously we use that sometimes as a proxy as well. But Claire, do you want to come in and talk a little bit, I suppose, about your interactions with the staff as well, and your sense from them?
Yeah, so the evidence we have on the staff morale is mainly anecdotal. As Helen has already outlined, it varied across different departments, but our key interactions are with the finance department, who was one of the worst impacted teams. So we are aware that after the cyber attack, there was a lot of pressure on staff, and staff morale was quite low as they tried to rebuild the system. We're hopeful that things are now improving. There is a new financial ledger in place. The finance team did a wonderful job getting the 24-25 accounts prepared on time. So we got them by the June deadline. Unfortunately, because we were still catching up with the prior year audit, we've not managed to do that, but we are kicking off the audit next week. We've got planning meetings in. So we're hopeful that things have now turned a corner and the impact of the cyber attack has diminished, recognising that there is still work ongoing.
Questions on the station, Christine? I maybe just pick up on Ruth mentioned comms and you came back with finance, the effect on finance. I was going to say later on that actually one of the things that you commented on was that external comms were good, internal less so. So coming back to the staff well-being, etc., has something been done about that now, because as part of the disaster recovery process?
Thank you. Yeah, Claire, do you want to come in on the specifics around how the work around the business continuity plan has taken into account the suggestions on internal comms?
Yeah, I think that I'd said that the business continuity plan comms strategy hasn't actually been updated since the lessons learned exercise, so that will need to be reviewed. I'm not sure I have much else that I can add on the call.
And in terms of the comms team, were there any gaps there? Were there any vacancies at the time?
I don't have that information.
No, I was just coming back to that general point. Thank you. Eric?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I'm delighted to hear you say that they managed to complete the 24-25 accounts. I think that's a tremendous achievement at any time. I mean, it beggars belief what the staff have gone through to get to this stage, because my gut feeling is you can't always test some of these things to actually put in a sort of manual process. So it'll be interesting eventually to sort of lessons like how they went about, and I'm sure other councils could learn, because I think it's one of these key things you can not think so far ahead to the worst case scenario, but when your worst case scenario is a lot worse than the reality, how you can actually test some of these things in practice. My specific question was moving away from the impact on the council itself to understanding the impact on the wider community. I think in particular about suppliers, contractors, and maybe equally or more importantly, it's a welfare payments, etc. So I'd be interested if there's any information. I know there's information in your report of how the council went about the process, how it worked with DWP, etc. But I just wonder if there's any, whether it's anecdotal evidence of what the impact was on the wider community of potentially delays in payments or people not being able to get welfare benefits that they were entitled to. So not so much the the financial cost, but the cost in terms of that wider aspect.
And I bring the team in that, but I think in terms of the benefit payments, I think the council recognised that delays in benefit payments could have seriously affected some of their most vulnerable residents. So they worked with the Department of Work and Pensions to manually recreate the payments. And those payments were based on previous records. Now, obviously, that comes with a risk for the council in terms of overpayments, and obviously risks around fraud and error as well in relation to that. But I think those are the risks that the council chose to take in that case.
How supportive were the DWP?
I don't know if we've got information on that. I don't know if you'd be able to.
I don't have enough information to be able to comment fully on that.
Thank you.
Okay, Angela.
Thank you. So I think the report's great, and the council is to be commended in restricting its additional expenditure on recovery to just under £1 million. I know it's still a lot of money, but I do think it could have been significantly higher given the systems that were affected. I do wonder, finance aside, what's the impact been on performance across services? So we would have had their published plans, their annual plans, or their longer term plans. Is it possible to say how the diverting staff onto recovery has then impacted on the ambitions of the council, of the goals that they had set initially before this happened?
Yeah, so performance reporting was impacted by the cyber attack. So quarterly reporting was not available, but the Corolla presented its public performance report for 23-24 to the Audit and Scrutiny Committee on the 1st of May of this year. Overall, the service performance information that was reported by the council demonstrates that performance compared to prior years and against other councils has remained relatively stable during this time. The most recently published information on service performance reported on the council's website and their annual performance report highlights that of the 94 LGBF indicators, local government benchmarking framework indicators reported by the council, 63% have improved since base year, 9% have remained the same, and 28% have worsened. If we look at changes against the most recent year, 36% of performance indicators have improved, 26% have stayed the same, and 38% have declined. So whilst overall reporting has been disrupted by the cyber attack, so it's obviously difficult to conclude definitively, and we obviously don't know what that counterfactual might have looked like that we've been comparing against it. I'd say overall it doesn't look like there has been a marked shift in service performance as a result, which I think is probably testament to the efforts of the staff involved. I do think it's important to remember, and I keep coming back to this, obviously not all services were as affected as others, so health and education services were affected, as already outlined in my report as well.
That's encouraging. Thank you. Can I just add one other question on as well? We're talking about staff. One of the outstanding actions that you talk about on paragraph 63 is full implementation of the staff training programme. Is that progressing now?
Yes, it is. So the staff training programme is progressing. Claire might want to say a little bit about the exact statistics of how many have gone through it. I don't think it is being formally reported in terms of take-up, but I think it is being informally managed by lead officers. And I think there is a plan to articulate when the refresher training is required by as well, but Claire, you might have this.
Yeah, so at September, 67% of staff had undertaken the training, and the ongoing action was around about how they chase up the people who hadn't done the training and formalising that refresher training programme. So that's why the action is only partially implemented, because they haven't got those formal arrangements around chasing and refreshers.
Thank you.
No senior people involved, we've not had the training.
unfortunately don't have the detail beyond the 67%.
But that is a clear request to understand the extent to which senior people are taking this seriously, to the extent that they're following through on the significant training requirements needed. Any other questions on this section? Nicola?
Could I just follow up briefly on some of the questioning that Ruth gave at the beginning of this section? I think we've heard and we can glean from the report that the staff have made a tremendous sustained effort in order to mitigate the impact of the cyber attack. And what you've informed us about around the absence rates is somewhat remarkable, I think. I just wondered whether, and appreciating that the impact wasn't felt across all of the departments, but for those teams who were particularly affected, has there been any investment in resources to provide support to staff in terms of their well-being? Is that something we have any evidence around?
I'm not sure we have the specifics on that. I'm afraid that's not to say that there hasn't been, and that's not to say that there aren't already, support in place anyway. I'm just afraid that we don't have the specifics.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, that takes us to our last two sections. One's around improvement actions, and Carol, you want to lead off on that?
You partly answered my question, which was around the follow-up training, but given the fact that cyber attacks are usually 90%, a human has had a contributory factor to it, and the fact that we're only now starting to monitor the training, and you're saying the actions are now only now in place for the refresher training, do you know the reasons for why that wasn't prioritised sooner, and why that was one that's outstanding given the high human nature of cyber attacks?
I'm afraid I can't comment on why it wasn't prioritised before. I suppose I'd just note, as Claire has already said, that training is underway. I think it is also important to emphasise that while the cyber attackers gained entry via an employee's account, we don't know how they did that. So I think it is important to, I suppose, to be as clear that we don't know that human error was, that we don't know that there was an employee error there that enabled the cyber attackers to gain access to the account. As I said earlier, no indicators of compromise were identified, and that's not unusual. So I think whilst we rightly put that emphasis on that staff training, I wouldn't want that to be taken away, but that was the.
And on that, it did say that the attack took place between 3 and 5 in the morning. Have they ruled out that an employee wasn't working then at that time on a computer?
As I say, I think the fact that they haven't found any indicators of compromise in that regard means that I think that that doesn't appear to have been the factor.
Any other questions under improvement? Malcolm.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Just quickly, I noticed one of the priorities in the recovery phase was building back better. That was a phrase was used a few times in your report. So I just wondered if you can say anything about that. What will that look like once it concludes, and are there any trade-offs involved in trying to achieve that?
I think at its essence, it's about building cyber resilience into the systems, and I think in terms of the trade-offs or the funding around that, I think of the 0.95 million, 0.3 million of that as part of that sort of ongoing, I suppose, building back better costs. But Claire, I don't know, do you want to say what you've seen that mean in practice, I suppose, from a financial perspective?
Yeah, so while the internal audit report noted that they're unlikely to get the best systems and the best the market has to offer because of budgetary constraints, they are working to find some improvement. So just for example, with the financial ledger, they have purchased the new financial ledger, which is cloud-based and is the version ahead of what they were currently using. So it's a lot of little things.
That needs again also takes us into sort of lessons learned, so if you want to lead off on that.
Yeah, thank you. So I think as we've said, the council has done remarkably well to keep services going and deal with such a traumatic incident taking place. Their experience will be of value to others. I'm just wondering whether you know how they've documented what they did and how they might be sharing that both with other councils but wider.
Yes, so I suppose we're not aware of any formal processes for sharing lessons learned from the cyber attack with other councils or other public bodies. But I would say that throughout, I think they have been engaging with the Scottish Government, the National Cyber Security Centre and the Cyber and Fraud Centre, all of whom have roles and responsibilities in supporting organisations more widely. And I'd hope that through that there is a wide gathering of lessons learned. I'm not aware of anything more formally that's taken place.
No one in Scottish Government or the service gathering it and helping.
It's probably the wrong person to ask that question to, I think, but I'm not aware of anything. It's certainly not something that's come across our desk, but that's not to say again, it's not anything that is
It's maybe something that we should pick up on, because I do think that, you know, harrowing as it might have been, it could avoid similar situations arising elsewhere.
Just briefly on Angela's point, and presumably, Helen, the very existence of your Section 102 report provides an opportunity to more widely publicise. And I think as Angela's into that, we need to speak about that in private session probably, but I hope you would agree it provides an opportunity to more widely publicise what happened and what actions Western Isles took to recover from the problems.
Exactly, and as you know, the purpose of a Section 102 report can be about, you know, that wider public awareness, wider public interest story on reporting these things. And as I have set out in my report, I think there are lessons to learn. I'm very happy to have a discussion with the Commission about how best to support the dissemination of those lessons.
Any other questions on lessons learned, Mike, and then Derek?
I suppose mine was very much on the broader question in that while it's not possible to say that implementing the audit recommendations would have prevented this, it seems that one of the wise things to do would be to implement audit recommendations around cybersecurity. And I suppose, what picture do you have of the extent to which there are recommendations in this area that are happening in other authorities and not being?
Absolutely, as I highlighted, paragraph 64, audit recommendations are made to help improve governance arrangements and help public bodies safeguard their assets. And it's important, I think one of the things that we've seen in this is that it's important that when recommendations are accepted, that timelines are set, responsible officers are outlined, and that those timelines are realistic and achievable as well. And that just helps ensure that clear accountability for delivery and enables effective monitoring of progress. And from our review, we've obviously highlighted that that's one of the areas that we've been encouraging the council to take forward. More generally, I think as you've highlighted, this is an area I think Audit Scotland is focusing more of our time on in terms of looking at the extent to which our recommendations are implemented. We know that vast majority of them are accepted and implemented, and obviously it is a management decision as to whether to accept audit recommendations. But I think this is something that we will come back to as well in terms of that follow-up in more detail.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I mean, I think my question was probably maybe been partly we covered, but it's maybe in that broader picture as well, but lessons learned. So one of the questions I had from your report was seemed to suggest that cloud-based systems offered a greater level of protection. Was it interesting? You said, Claire, that then introduced a new financial system which was cloud-based. So I wonder, that was one question I had in mind, whether that was something we should be looking at as a formal recommendation that council more generally, not just the Corlett, that should be looking at cloud-based system stuff and data protection. And I guess the other points about, but I mean, we are kind of pushing, looking for councils to share services or work collaboratively. And I do wonder whether that potentially opens up a greater risk or not. And I'm not sure whether that is the case, but it's a question mulling over now. It's maybe wider than just this, but it's part of the lessons learned. It's got to think in our own head, well, actually, what can you do in terms of prevention? And does it expose individual councils to greater risk if they work more collaboratively?
So I'm bringing the team to talk specifically around, I suppose, the callers' experience with their education in schools and that network in terms of that shared services. I think to take your first question around cloud-based technology, and I'm obviously not an IT expert. And so I don't think I'd want to make a recommendation in that space on what IT systems should or shouldn't be used. I think that is way beyond my remit. But I suppose I would observe that in this instance, I think as we have the cloud-based platform, experienced minimal disruption to core services, and but they were still affected by the loss of data that was stored on servers and the temporary breakdown in communications. But a different attack might have yielded different results. I also don't know what the state of play across local in terms of the adoption of cloud-based technology and just what scale or ask that might be. But as I say, I think that that's a question for digital and cybersecurity experts. In this case, we just, I suppose, limited ourselves to the recommendation that organisations should review their infrastructure to ensure it is resilient and meets recognised disaster recovery standards. And I think at this point, I personally couldn't go further than that. But Claire, do you want to just come back to that shared services point and the experience with the schools network?
Yeah, again, I'm not an IT expert and I don't really have the experience to comment on how likely that risk is. But our experience with the Corla was in the early stages of the cyber attack. They acted quite quickly to advise staff not to access the CMIS system and to close off the CMIS system due to the risk that it might spread throughout the education network across Scotland. So clearly that was the risk they took into consideration and acted appropriately for that.
Yes, lessons learned are certainly something we will want to be pondering a bit more in our private station. But is there any other questions in this public? We've got the auditors here. Anything else? No, I think we've had a good run at it. And yes, there's commendations and also concerns in equal measure, I think. So thank you, and for your input today. That then takes us to item 6. Local government policy update, and that's with Joe.
Thanks very much, Chair. As usual, happy to put the emphasis on answering questions from members, but a couple of updates since the report was produced. Members might be aware of some rumours around the UK budget in 3 weeks' time and what might happen in terms of taxation, which could potentially have an impact on the Scottish budget, which might then feed through into the funding available to the government. But you know, a lot still to happen in that space, so we'll keep an eye on that. In terms of the Scottish budget itself, the bill timetable itself has been published, which really just demonstrates the kind of compressed timescale that all of that is going to happen in the new year. It's a 6-week period from the announcement of the budget to the budget bill due to be passed at stage 3. Meanwhile, Shona Robinson has also written to the Local Government Committee regarding the general power of competence. She has pointed out that the consultation provided no definitive preference regarding that, and says there's no certainty that a general power will actually deliver the flexibilities that councils are potentially looking for, and is proposing taking a number of interim measures in place of a sort of big bang kind of approach. And there's a couple that have been set out in her letter around widening the definition of the power to advance wellbeing in the 2003 Local Government in Scotland Act. It's not set out yet exactly how that would be done. So again, another aspect that I will keep an eye on. But yeah, happy to answer any questions. Thanks.
So any questions for Joe? And any forms of session?
I've got a operational question, and it's on the engagements and links, and it's just what extent do we know they're real people as opposed to for some of the engagements, bots? And has that been considered?
I'm sorry, Carol, what's that in relation to?
In terms of the engagements where it's just a view, how much do we know that they're real people as opposed to bots? Because increasingly what we've found in some areas is it's bot views and not real views
On the commission reports?
on the commission reports.
Yeah, so you'll see that actually as partly as a result of that issue is the reason why I'm no longer doing the quarterly figures, because I've been in contact with the communications team and they've kind of given that warning about the reliability of those figures. What we can say is that that activity tends to happen over a period of time. So the kind of immediate activity and immediate download numbers are more reliable. So where I've put figures for downloads of reports for recently published reports, they're still reasonably reliable. And in terms of the social media engagement, again, similarly, I guess there is an element that some of that might be kind of automated activity, but unlikely that that would happen in the sort of first 24, 48 hours. So the information that members get from the communications team and from myself in these reports should still stack up. And I think that the general trends that we see in terms of comparisons, if our particular reports have more or less engagement, again, that kind of general picture is still representative of reality, if you like.
Follow up to that. With AI becoming more sophisticated at scraping data, are we finding that people are using AI to get the information on the audit reports and not coming to source documents? Or are we still getting people coming to our source first?
It's difficult to tell, but the figures that we have in terms of the activity that we have on our website would be people coming to our website. Yeah. So it may be that the report is also then being distributed via, second, third, fourth parties, if you like. But we wouldn't get the figures from that. So again, it's that thing of it's definitely something that we're bearing in mind in terms of.
Get less clicks, it might be the AI scraped it.
Yes, I think there's an element of kind of a cycle there as well, where if that does happen, that's likely to generate more activity that people might then click through to maybe other commission reports or commission website, commission social media, etc. So actually that might actually help broaden the reach of reports as well in a way, but with that caveat around then the numbers that we see and how reliable they are.
Thanks. A couple of questions. The first question, you mentioned the contracted timescale for the local government settlement. Is that just going to 1 year figure, or are they still going to go ahead with 3 years as was indicated earlier? Do we have any idea?
Recent comments from the Cabinet Secretary in Parliament indicate that the plan in terms of what they will publish is still the same. It is their intention to provide that kind of indication of multi-year. Is dependent on what information they get from the UK government. But as far as what is going to be published, there's a number of different documents that they intend to publish, including a spending review, and all of that is still planned to happen. It's just when that's going to happen, and then the budget bill formal process through Parliament is a lot more contracted than normal.
Okay. No, but thanks for getting the additional information about Falkirk Council. I'm still not sure, got my head around what they're saying compared to how the service session are playing, but I'm happy to take that out with the meeting.
And thanks for me for the information in relation to the government funding. I was very struck by the fact that 75 towns, including 10 in Scotland, the neighbourhood boards in those areas are due to submit locally produced regeneration plans to the UK government, which prompts the obvious question of how does that fit in with, as it were, local authority, Scottish government, etc., regeneration plans. Are you aware of whether that issue is being addressed, as it were, explicitly, or whether there is it's going to be an issue just for local determination?
I know there's a number of different funding programmes, including the Scottish Government make their own kind of grants to specific areas in similar schemes as well. In terms of the UK Government funding through the Plan for Neighbourhoods, etc. I know actually my hometown is one of those that was part of the first tranche. So I've seen how that process has played out. And it doesn't really involve the local authority or the Scottish Government, as far as I can tell. It is the funding is provided from the UK Government and the Community Forums Board, which does have local authority representation, as well as various other local stakeholders. And through community consultation, they've come up with a list, a wish list, if you like, of ways to spend 20 million, and they're looking now at how that can fit together in terms of the different pieces that might make up a total of that sum. And that plan is now being presented to the UK Government in order for the UK Government to then make that judgment as to whether that's a robust enough plan. So it's, in a way, is kind of bypassing the local authority and Scottish Government. But as I say, there are kind of equivalent measures that the Scottish Government has to fund similar types of projects in similar types of ways.
I suppose it's picking up that maybe I'm misunderstanding the question, but it's suggesting there's potentially two views of a region and two different geographical structures around that region, which might not be, but possibly three. Yes, it might be something we want to ponder about. How do we get a better understanding of how those are or are not joined up, and the extent to which it then means not best value for the resource being utilised in all of them. Any other questions for Joe? Again, triggers lots of thoughts, Joe. Thank you. Takes us to the chair's report. I just wanted to pick up a couple of things. One is really going through the 6 monthly check-in. I think mostly finished, which has been good, just to give me a chance to understand where any issues or concerns might arise. All good so far. Sarah and I had a very good session with the Cabinet Secretary in October, principally to give him the heads up about our desire to make sure that public service reform is not impeded in any way by our formal duties in side on the local government part of any public service reform. And I think he took that well, and as a consequence, there's a follow-up meeting with some of his officials, so that was a good session. And I'm also reached out to and have managed to get agreement with the convener of the local government committee, Ariana Burgess, for a meeting on the 4th of December. I'm really keen that we get a chance, the County Commission gets a chance to have a different relationship with that committee as a way of giving us a chance to have more of our thinking used in their scrutiny of and so the start of that is going to be, as I say, on the 4th of December. And just to confirm that we've also got a desire to make sure that the North Ayrshire example is used as a good example of transformation. So we'll use that on the 4th of December. And I know there's the follow-up meeting coming up. What the date is next week. Yeah. So that will be, that's really all I wanted to flag up, but it's good material and good reception from those that we're meeting and getting out there a bit more. Any questions anybody's got on things in the meeting? No. That takes us then to any other public business anybody wants to raise. That takes us to the end of the session. If I can ask Lee to switch off the recording.